Welcome to the Faith Forum, a series of talks with leading thinkers, best-selling authors, business leaders, philosophers, artists, and theologians of our time. We're so happy you've joined us, and we hope this podcast offers food for your spiritual journey. From Christ Episcopal Church in Charlotte, North Carolina, I'm the Reverend Chip Edens, and this is the Faith Forum. This morning, we are joined by a leader whose work has shaped the way America thinks about aging, retirement, and the policies that define the lives of millions. Debra Whitman is the Executive Vice President and Chief Public Policy Officer at the AARP, where she leads the organization's efforts to address some of the most pressing issues of our time: financial security, healthcare, caregiving, and the future of work. With a career that spans Capitol Hill, the Social Security Administration, and global institutions like the World Bank, she has been at the center of national and international conversations about aging in the 21st century. As staff director for the U.S. Senate Special Committee on Aging, she played a pivotal role in crafting policies that impact older Americans, ensuring that issues like Social Security, Medicare, long-term care remain at the forefront of legislative priorities. At a time when Americans are living longer and when economic and technological shifts are redefining what it means to retire, and when caregiving is an increasing issue and burden on families, her voice has been critical in advocating for solutions that protect the dignity and well-being of older adults. This morning, we'll talk about the changing landscape of aging in America, the challenges and opportunities ahead, and what needs to happen to ensure a future where all generations can thrive. Deb, welcome.
Thanks so much, Chip, for having me, and thank you to this great crowd.
Well, Deb, this book is I just have to say, is extraordinary, and I want everyone here to pick up a copy of it. I strongly encourage you to pick up a copy of this book, because it is so incredibly rich with facts and details. This book touches on so many of the just major issues that all of us face. And I think what's important about this is it will get you thinking about it, and it will hopefully get you having a conversation with your family and allow us as a congregation to have a much bigger and more important conversation, which we will be doing through our Center for Wellbeing. Questions like, how long will we live? Will I be healthy? Will I lose my memory? How long will I work? Will I have enough money? Where will I live? How will I die? And then at the back of the book, she's got a very large section about essential things that we, and both as individuals and a nation, need to think about in what's called a better second 50. So following this, are going to be books available for you, and I strongly encourage you to get one. So this book, Deb, you've been working in this field for nearly 2 decades, and this book is based on so much of your experience and knowledge. And so I'm just kind of wondering why this book and why now?
So again, thanks for having me. I've worked on aging issues at the Social Security Administration. You heard the whole background. And then I was turning 50, and I realized, you know what, there's a lot that I don't know. And I looked on my shelf, and there's What to Expect When You're Expecting. My kids were about to graduate from high school. I had a whole series of books about what to think about in college. You know, I'd been in the job market. I had all these leadership and other books, but there really wasn't a What to Expect When You're Aging book out there. And so I wrote down the questions that I wanted to know. And actually, there were more than 7 for size and brevity. I shrunk a couple. And those became the chapters of the book. And I just have to ask the crowd, how many of you are either over 50 or one day want to be? Can you raise your hand? All right. So I have a great target audience here. What I really tried with the book is you can read it when you're 30 and have older parents or grandparents. You can read it when you're 50 and are thinking about some of the chapters, like how long will I work, a little bit more in detail. You can read it when you're 80 and skip maybe the how long will I work chapter and read the where will I live chapter. And so each chapter is sort of independent. I'm an economist, and I tried to write it in simple, clear language with stories and insights from experts all over the country. So I would say I wrote this book for myself as much as anything. And the questions themselves led to really good conversations with my own parents when I was asking them some of the questions. So hopefully people can use it for thinking about others as well.
So we tend to have a more negative view of aging, and we'll get into that. But in spring of 2022, you led something in collaboration with National Geographic, the second half of life study, in which you made this very interesting observation that while younger people often equate aging with reduced capacities and increased worries, people in their 70s and 80s report an uptick in happiness. So those of us who are miserable in our 40s and 50s have something to look forward to. Is that right?
It is true. We're twice as happy in our 70s and 80s that we are in our 40s and 50s, according to the survey. And even things that were counterintuitive, we know our health often declines as we age, but we asked people, do you have health conditions? Yes. 8 out of 10 people in their latter years have health conditions. Are you healthy? Yes. And I think it's because we change our reference point, right? You're not going to wake up and spring out of bed and maybe run 20 miles when you're 80. But you're able to get out of bed and do the things you want to do, and that's what you appreciate. And so I think we've talked about the second 50 both as something I don't want to think about and something that I want to avoid, when most of us will be spending lots of years in that time. And when I talk to older people and when I interviewed them, they're actually having a good part of their life. And so that fear and I'll just say ageism affects not only individuals, but their own health too, and we can talk about that.
Well, you say that aging is not a single story.
No.
And we tend to want to group it into one single story, but there's so many different.
Childhood's not a single story too. My husband's a teacher, and so there's a range of experiences we have as mothers with babies and as we age. So some people reach later years with a good amount of money and a good amount of health and a good amount of friends, and then other people don't. And so I do really try to talk about the disparities across our population and the differences that people face, and how can we help to make that more even across our lifespan.
What do you make of this movement that we see more and more about sort of this kind of self-help, age-defying, whether it's juices or you mentioned straws, you mentioned all kinds of different injections, various things like that, to really sort of prolong or push out the notion of aging. What's real, what's not real?
So the excitement is real. There is a growing body of science that looks at how do we change the biological rate of aging. So how can we slow the aging of our cells down? And that's really exciting because so many diseases like cancer, heart disease, diabetes go up as we age. So if we could slow the aging process, we could keep people healthier longer, we could increase our health span. We are seeing the ability to do that in animals, and we're studying animals that age more slowly to see how that works. What I worry about is there's no FDA approved. There's a ton of snake oil out there. And a drug that works well in a mouse or a worm may not work as well in a human. And so there's lots of doctors pushing drugs that I can have really negative effects. I'm not going to say the name of drugs because people might put it down and call their doctor. But there's one that people take when they're have a organ transplant, and it lowers your immunity. Well, if you don't take that right and your immunity is lowered, you could die from a cold, because it worked in mice, but they were in a controlled environment. And so I would just caution people, keep your money in your pocket right now. I can tell you do you want to hear the things that actually make you live longer?
Yes.
Well, let's go there. Who wants to hear the things that can make you live longer? So they probably won't surprise you. There's 5 healthy habits that there's really good research, and they can add about a decade to your life. So healthy diet, exercise, don't smoke, don't drink too much, and maintain a healthy body weight. So those 5 can give you about a decade longer. Now, my dad loves a bourbon every night, eats lots of steak, but he gave up smoking when my brother was born. And so even one healthy habit that he has will give you an extra 2 years of life. So it's not a 0-1. Do what you can in those areas. But even more important are your mindset and your relationships. So can I do a crowd test? Think in your mind of the first word when you think about somebody who's older. Okay? Raise your hand if that word is a positive word. Awesome. All of you people with your hands up are going to live 7.5 years longer.
Saw a couple more hands go up right after that.
Yeah, to change, if you didn't raise your hand, it's time to change your mindset. How we view aging affects us physiologically. Dr. Becca Levy at Yale, you should have her come one day, has done this extensive body of research to show that if you have a positive view on aging, if you think that aging is a time of growth, wisdom, ability to give back, you live not only 7.5 years longer, your rates of heart disease are lower. Even they looked at the brains of people who died and then looked back, did they say they had a positive view years earlier? Their brains were 3.5 had 3.5 times the volume, I think is the way to put it. So they had lower risk of Alzheimer's and dementia. So our mindsets really matter. I also interviewed Bob Waldinger at Harvard University. He's led the largest study, it's a Harvard study of adult development, where they started interviewing people in the 1920s, I believe, and then just kept interviewing them over the whole course of their life and added their family members and others. And he wanted to know, well, what makes a good life? And if I look at the people who are healthy in their 80s, what's different about them in their 50s than the people who are not healthy in their 80s? So you with me? Healthy people in their 80s, unhealthy people in their 80s. Looked back 30 years earlier. 30 years earlier, the people with good health it wasn't their cholesterol, it wasn't that they exercised, it's they had strong relationships, that they had really good connections with their community and with their families. And so these 2 things, yes, I want you to eat right and exercise and not smoke and all of those things, but I also really want people to not necessarily go towards these pills that are unproven and treatments, but to think about their future in a positive way, and to connect with others, because we know that isolation is as deadly as smoking 7 cigarettes a day. So having that connection, and that's clearly what you're building here.
From a scientific biological perspective, why is it as a general rule that women live longer than men?
Oh, I went in this rabbit hole for like a month. So one of the things that was fun about the book is there's things I knew. Like I knew women live longer, but I didn't know why. And so I'm an economist, not a doctor. I'm reading all about hormones and biology, and that plays a role. But it's also our behaviors. And so you men are less likely to go to a doctor when you're sick than women, and that helps shorten your life. You're more likely to shoot a gun. You're more likely to die in a car accident. You're more likely to participate in wars historically. Women's biology is protective in that we're less likely to get infections, but that can also go out of whack, and we can be more likely to get autoimmune and other diseases.
Is that estrogen?
It's estrogen versus testosterone. So those are our core biological differences. But then, Chip, I found a study of Bavarian monks and nuns, and they had very good records of their lifespan, and they were living very similar lives. They could keep track of very similar stress levels and all of that, and the nuns still lived a couple years longer. So our biology still makes a difference, and it's true almost every species. The female tends to live a bit longer, but you men keep going to the doctors and making sure you get checked out.
So I'm thinking about isolation, loneliness, and I'm thinking about the habits of watching the news and being on social media, and I'm literally wondering if that's killing us in light of the negativity, in light of the isolation, and being able to process things. What would you say about sort of time on social media, time on news, versus perhaps some other healthier habits like being in community? We've got this beautiful building that we're building, as I told you about, which is just all about bringing people together across ages and differences to build true relationships. But have there been any studies or anything that anecdotally that you could point to that where what I've just described, these habits, could actually really set us back?
So it's kind of too early to tell, because those have risen in the last few decades, and more among people younger, so we might see things. That said, life expectancy even before the pandemic was dropping in the United States. Two researchers, Ann Case and Angus Deaton, called it the deaths of despair. And it was a rise in more and more fatalities and deaths in the middle of people's life, largely from alcohol and opioids, also suicide, and more and more heart conditions. So the United States was going backwards before the pandemic, and then the pandemic hit and we lost a lot of life expectancy. So, Chip, you had asked me in Aspen a question I couldn't answer, so I looked up the answer after I got back, and you asked, how does faith impact our lifespan? And so I've got some numbers for you, and I know others are more expert, but I just wanted to make sure I finally answered your question, and I think it's relevant clearly for this audience. So people with some type of faith, so people that are self-identifying as being religious or spiritual, there's one study that showed that religiously affiliated adults across the United States live about 4 years longer. And come to church. I'm telling you. People who are religious in counties that are religious live about still 2 years longer. And this will be good for your seats and chairs. Frequent attendance at church by health professionals had fewer deaths of despair, so fewer deaths by alcohol and drugs and suicide. And I want to know why that was. And a piece of it is that your religious affiliations improve your quality of life. It increases your life satisfaction. It increases your sense of happiness, your self-rated health. So, like I said, people, even with health conditions, they say, I'm healthier. And it lowers your risk of coronary heart disease. And then here's one good one. One study said of adults who attended religious service at least one time a week had 1 to 4 years longer health span, so they had fewer years of disability in their lives. And so
Wow.
I think another thing I found was having a sense of purpose.
Yes.
And that sense of connection really makes a difference. And it could be religion that helps give you a sense of purpose. It could be taking care of somebody in your life, or your children, your grandchildren, your parents, your grandparents. It could be taking care of a pet. Purpose can be found in plants. They have found when they put birds or even plants in nursing homes, people did better. And so something that you have a connection for and that you have a sense of meaning. And I think that is defined by each of us.
I'm struck by this notion of a sense of purpose, how easy it is to self-isolate and to, like I said, get caught up in the genuine worries of the world, and what a beautiful shift it is when someone can begin to see that their life still has great purpose. It gives people a reason to get up in the morning. And look, we have like 100 jobs here at the church. Okay, so if you're in the TV watching, social media sort of cycle, we can help you break that, because there's so many ways. And I really do think that when you think about church, think of it as a place of public health, a place of genuine connection and vitality, a resource of encouragement. And through our Center for Wellbeing, we're able now to get really into deeper conversations. This past week, we had 30 therapists that came here to learn about what we were doing and to help build a network and to help us begin to think about classes and workshops and retreats. So it's really been in so many conversations that I've had with folks at the Aspen Institute, Deb and others, where as a pastor who could only generally meet, our clergy can generally meet with people 3 or 4 times, after seeing and wondering what was happening to people after that, and hearing often very sad news, that we made this very bold move to get essentially into the work of individual and public health. So it's an interesting lens, folks, through which to think of church. You can think of church as I go to church. You can think of church as I'm a part of a community of people who are different, across different ages, the beauty of sort of intergenerational connection, and to know that what we are in the business of is love and meaning making. And to think that that's something that you can do from 5 years old to 105 years old in this place, a lifelong connection. I really, all of these things have sort of come together for me, particularly as I read so many books and your book in particular. I wonder what you would say to people who are at a place of maybe thinking about what are the healthy habits that they can begin to have conversations with themselves and with their families about, that can improve the quality of one's life every single day. I mean, walk me through a day. Let's get really practical.
Wow.
If we were to start off in the morning, what would you say as things probably not to do and things to maybe consider doing?
Okay, this is down to the micro level, so let me do my best.
Yeah.
Sleep is very important, especially for our cognitive health. Mm-hmm. And our sleep changes as we age. Mm-hmm. And so getting the right amount of sleep, not too little, so you're not getting enough rest, or too much that you're sleeping all day. Mm-hmm. There's sort of a sweet spot. So wake up rested.
And get out of bed.
And get out of bed.
Yeah.
I think our muscle mass also decreases as we age. So doing strength exercises and balance exercises is really, really key. More and more of us, unfortunately, will die of falls as we age. Both my grandmother and my husband's grandfather died because they broke their hip after accidental falls. So I would do a little exercise. I'm not going to tell you what to eat because I think there's all kinds of healthy diets out there, and there's no one. My husband thinks that every blueberry is going to extend his life. And blueberries are great. I'm not saying that they're not, but eat a healthy breakfast. Protein intake also is necessary as we age. And then I'd call a friend, go for a walk, have some way that you're connecting with others. You talked about the opportunities for volunteering. Boy, that's a great sense of purpose. I started to talk about my dad's bad health behaviors, but I didn't talk about his good health behaviors. One, I grew up in Electric City, Washington, which if anybody knows, you win a free book. It's the middle of nowhere, Washington State, about 50 miles from the nearest stoplight. And we have a post office. We don't get it delivered to our house. And my dad will go there and he'll spend an hour just talking to every single person that comes in, and the postmistress and who I went to high school with. And that kind of social connection is really important. And then he'll go volunteer. They clean their church. He was working for a long time as a volunteer bartender at the golf course. He doesn't golf. But
the golfers love him.
But the golfers loved him, and he loved just chatting it up. And so, those kind of things are incredibly, incredibly healthy. So I went through eat right, exercise, sleep. Engage your brain. That's another thing for our cognitive health. Did you know you can reduce your risk factor for cognitive decline and dementia by 1/3? Most people think that there's nothing you can do, but all of those healthy habits that I talked about can reduce your risk for cognitive decline and dementia. And in fact, we could reduce globally 40% of dementia, Alzheimer's, if everybody had those healthy behaviors and we increased education and decreased things like air pollution. So some of the things about aging that we thought were inevitable, I think I also try to point out we can do things on. So,
well, let's talk about losing our memory, because I think that's something that everybody worries a lot about. And I wonder if you could maybe talk about the different categories of cognitive decline. You talk about multiple kinds of, they're not all the same. And of course, one of the questions that so many of us have every single day, I would say this certainly in my 50s, is what's the difference between sort of not remembering something and then that panic of, oh my gosh, I'm in a state of cognitive decline.
All right, so again, audience participation. I'm trying to keep you awake. Not all of you have a coffee in your hands. How many of you have lost your keys or something like that, or walked in a room and forgot why you were there? My kids did it all the time. Okay, so that's not dementia. That's just a normal part of your brain, and maybe we put a glass jar by the door, and then we lost our keys a lot less. So maybe it's just some behaviors that you can change. If you can't remember your way home, if you can't remember how to drive, those things are very worrisome, and you should get it checked out. And when I say checked out, do so. A lot of people don't go to the doctor for years, even when they're suspecting things. And it could be nothing. It could be something that you can fix. So I'm using my parents a lot. They're not here, but this time last year, my dad was seeing trees grow out of the wall and seeing people who were not there in his living room. And I was really worried because one of the worst, not that they're not all bad, but one of the worst types of dementia is called Lewy bodies dementia. I don't know if any of you have family that have had that. It's horrible. It's sort of Parkinson's with schizophrenia and Alzheimer's all mixed together. And it starts with having delusions like you do when you have schizophrenia. And so that's what I was worried about. But it turns out my dad was put on some new medication, and that interfered with his cognitive ability, and once he went off, it was better. And so I use that story to say, talk to your doctors, make sure that, it's not a medication interaction, that your vitamin levels are all right, so do your blood work. The other reason to get diagnosed early is to make plans, to ask for help, and also to help protect people. So since I wrote the book, we've done some work with the MIT Age Lab, because I read a couple of studies that show our cognitive health and our financial health are really related. So people who are diagnosed with Alzheimer's and dementia often have lost half of their net worth in the 6 years before they're diagnosed. So as your brain goes, one of the most first thing to go is your numeracy, the ability to do math and maybe pay your bills. And so a lot of times if you see somebody you love who has a big pile of bills, or starts getting a taste for the home shopping network and buying a lot of things, it also makes us more vulnerable to scams and fraud. So there's no one thing that happens, but it's really important to sort of, ask people questions. Hey, Dad, have you got that checked out? Have you talked to a doctor? May I go with you? All of those things. If you start to see, financial issues could be related to cognitive issues. And that's something that we're just starting to understand and to communicate to people.
So does that start with an internist, start there, then perhaps a neurologist? What does a workup look like?
So start with your GP.
Okay.
And, again, start with your list of medicines first. There are also great doctors who are gerontologists. As your health, maybe you get multiple conditions, gerontologists are trained on older bodies, so they also understand things like the dosing might change as you age, or be able to say, yes, I know you're on the 7 drugs, but this one's really less important for you at this time in your life. They're more aware of cognitive issues than others. So if you can find a gerontologist or geriatrician, I highly recommend that too. We on AARP have a thing called Stay Sharp, which not only does testing for your brain, and you can keep doing it over time so you can see how your scores change, but also sort of pings you about the areas of brain health that you can work on. So it's things like your sleep, your exercise, your diet, your social connectivity, and even we have some cognitive stimulating activities, i.e. games, on there as well. And I took it. I didn't perform perfectly. And, it's on things that I've never been good at, remembering names and things like that. But it's a good resource. And some of the testing is absolutely free. Others are free if you're a member. So,
how long will we work? What are the issues that come up with that? And what do you make of this whole concept of retirement versus, say, a kind of a rewirement?
I think this is back to where there's no one way to age. So many of us love our work. I get to sit down most of my day. I'm not lifting heavy things. And I like to work a really long time. Mm-hmm. There are other people who weren't able to save for retirement and maybe still have a physically demanding job and would love to sit at home and not have to lift and bend, but need to continue working. So we have these two paths. And right now, we have almost twice as many people working in their 60s as we did in the 1990s. So more and more people are working longer. But I think it's for these two reasons. One is the push of I really enjoy it, that's just my sense of community, and the other is I really need to financially. The rub is that half of us in our 50s are going to lose our job involuntarily. means we're pushed out of our job, we have to leave be due to caregiving or because of a health condition. And when you lose your job in your 50s, half of us, it's really hard to stay working then until your late 60s. And so we need to be really thinking about how do we help people extend their working lives in multiple ways. One, we need to make sure that employers want to hire older workers. We know there's a lot of age discrimination out there. It takes longer for people over age 50 to find a job. We also know that employers don't offer as much training to older workers, even though we need to keep our skills done. But the good news is people want to work with multi-generational workforce. So young people want to work with older people want to work with younger people. And a multi-generational workforce is actually more productive than just having workers of single ages. So it's actually good for the economy when we have people working longer and using their skills and their expertise and all their wisdom.
Talk about work and stress, the difference between what you would call toxic stress, how to notice that, and sort of stress that, say, is more sort of episodic, that can actually lead toward resilience if one processes that.
So I think you've had people talking about epigenetics, right?
Yep. Where
we have our genes, but what turns our genes on and off varies over time. And toxic stress throughout our lives, whether it's from the workplace, a violent relationship, systemic racism, all of those things ages us prematurely. And so physiologically, our bodies age faster if we're under that kind of stress. And I think it can come from workplace or a home life, unfortunately.
What about, will I have enough money with aging? So the average lifespan in 1900 was, for a man, was 47 years old?
Yeah.
Yeah. So how do you think about that question? And as people are getting older, what are the things that you think we absolutely have to have in place? And yes, and of course, the whole issue of where we will live, I'd love you to get you to speak to that, because I think that those two things go together.
So I'll do the money one first, and this is where I personally feel like I've let you all down. In my career, I've been working on, making sure Social Security is solvent for the future for the last 25 years. And it's still not. In fact, in 2035, Social Security is not going bankrupt. Say that with me. Social Security is not going bankrupt. I need your saxophonist and band
right
here. But there will be a financial shortfall. It's the only program we have where the money coming in has to at least equal the money going out. Every other program, they deficit spend, as we know. We have huge deficits. Social Security is the only one required by law that it can't pay out money that isn't coming in or that was paid earlier. And the good news is, for many, many years, people have been paying more than was going out. So we had these things called trust funds. You might remember Al Gore, the lockbox, ironclad lockbox for trust funds. Unfortunately, the trust funds ran out, is slowly running out. And so by 2035, there will only be about 80% of the money we need coming in that we need to go out. So by law, benefits will have to be cut for everybody who is getting a Social Security check, whether it's a retirement or disability, by 20%. Who wants that? Nobody. And I don't think that will ever happen. People need that money. They rely on that money. But the longer we wait, if we had dealt with this when I started 25 years ago, it would have been pretty easy. It's getting harder every year. And so Social Security is something that people don't feel comfortable with. Again, I believe they will fix it, and we will be paying benefits to not just me when I retire, because 2035 is the year I turn 65, but hopefully my kids and grandkids. It's been a program that's been around and just celebrated its 90th birthday. we also have a problem with pensions. Not many people have pensions anymore. It used to be you retired and you got the gold watch, but very few employers are offering the paycheck of every month that people get from pensions. And then the third part is personal savings. How many of you have put money into a 401k or an IRA? And the problem with that part is that that employers get to decide whether they're going to offer a 401k. It's not mandatory. There's no requirement that every person who works at a job has the ability to save. And so half of people in this country work for employers that don't offer them a way to save. If you work for a big employer or a generous one like I do, I'm really blessed. And so what we're trying to do is go state by state to pass laws that make it easy for people to save for retirement. And so far, AARP has passed laws in 20 states. Actually, we're working right now in North Carolina. Last night I had dinner with our state representative here, Rebecca, and many of our volunteers. If you want volunteer opportunities, we've got them too. And we're trying to get a state program where people just through their normal taxes puts a little extra money. They can opt out if they don't have the finances, and that goes into a pooled fund that the state helps manage with a private entity. So it's like a state-based IRA. And so we've gotten 20 states to start this. It would make a huge difference for people when they retire, not after a couple years, but after a whole career, to be able to have that asset that they can draw on for times of emergency. Because Social Security on average only pays $22,000 a year, which is, I don't know how expensive it is here in Charlotte, but I don't think you can live on $22,000 a year in most parts of the country. And so people need to have extra savings, or they have to work until they die. Mm-hmm. So get involved in that one, because I'm.
In terms of
really
where
excited.
we will live, so I think this is a big issue, and I wonder if you could speak to this and speak to caregivers in particular. I don't know if it was you or someone this past summer talked about the panini generation of people that are caring for their, not sandwich generation, but are caring for with less time and less resources for both their children and their aging parents. So I wonder if you've got a word for caregivers, and how would you encourage us to think about housing and preparing for the right kind of housing for us as we get older?
Several questions in there. So caregivers are probably, if you haven't been a caregiver, you are the rare person. So most of us will either help somebody else, need help ourselves, and because we have a healthcare system that provides healthcare, so you can go to the hospital, but if you come home and you need extra help, that's not provided by Medicare. And so many people have to rely on their friends and neighbors and families in order to get them to a doctor or bring them food or to make sure that they can get help getting bathed or dressed, some of the activities of daily living that we talk about. It's becoming a huge burden on families to make sure that they have the ways to provide that care. And so we're seeing more and more caregivers have to leave their own jobs in order to take care of somebody else. And often we do that out of love. So my mother was a caregiver for my grandmother for over 50 years. One of the reasons I went into aging is I grew up with my grandmother. She had schizophrenia, but she was lovely, and we had a very close relationship. I made sure she got her medication, and she took care of me and made the best cinnamon rolls, which I still miss. So caregiving is now a core feature of an aging society, and one in which we're really forcing the families to figure it out. So I get calls from some of my friends. My mom just broke her hip. Now what do I do? And I was like, well, look at family medical leave so that you can go and help take care of her. The other rub that we have is on where we live is most of our houses are not designed for us as we age. How many people have stairs in their house? Yeah, pretty much all of us. I never thought about the stairs in my house because there's like 6 to go up to our main floor. And then my father-in-law's girlfriend, who's 94, came over, Flo, and she looked at those 6 stairs like they were Mount Kilimanjaro. Mm-hmm. And then Glenn had some knee surgery and had a hard time just getting up those 6 stairs. And there's no way to modify my home around it. So I realized at some point I'm going to have to leave this house and find somewhere else to live. And we're just not building houses that are designed for demographic change. And this is, I think, a huge business opportunity for builders. But many people are trying to modify their homes and make them more accessible. The other place people live is, if your home's not accessible and you need more care, into assisted living or nursing homes. Again, not covered by Medicare, can be extremely expensive. A nursing home costs on average in this country over $70,000. I was talking to a couple of friends who had a family member in dementia care, and they were paying $200,000 a year, and that didn't include incontinence care. So we have these huge potential expenses for housing and care that most people don't realize will hit them until they're in it. And that's way more money than most people have saved over the course of their lifetime for their whole retirement. And so that's another thing that I'm sort of pushing for is we need to have a better long-term care system. Right now, Medicaid will help you if you qualify, which means you have to have very low income and almost no assets. And then we'll see what happens to Medicaid going forward as well.
So I just want us to put something in perspective here, okay? We have at Christ Church over 1,000 people over the age of 65, and you will be one of those people. And we're having a massive shift in demographics. The number of people that are growing older is getting larger. And we're also seeing actual tables shifting, as Deb has mentioned, of people living longer, okay? So we as a church can decide whether we want to care less or care more, right? And we've decided we want to care more. And there's a saying in Outward Bound, if you can't get out of it, you got to get into it, right? Yeah. So I think the conversations that we've had today, the conversation we had is a conversation that we need to continue to have here, and think about more than just being a church where you go to worship and then go to your car and leave, right? Or maybe you stay for Sunday school. But how we can really live into our baptismal vow that we say, will you do all in your power to uphold these persons in their life in Christ? Like, we have the capacity to do that here by having conversations, by supporting each other, by building relationships, by having a center for well-being, by doing things like you see that for those of you that are interested, we have built a Renaissance community here of people over the age of 65 that are trying to figure out these questions, that are living into these questions, and you can be a part of a book study that begins March the 12th. And we can also, I think, come up with really creative solutions for how we can care for each other. Like if everybody had a connection to somebody that was older, the benefit would go both directions. Yeah. But you were talking about, I just want to kind of leave with this. I want you to give us a challenge, Deb, because we need it. In light of the fact that we are defined as a community of Christ's love, by the very nature of us being a religious institution, a living body that has the capacity to do more and care if we rise to that challenge. What do you think could be some creative solutions that we could do? We hear about these enormous challenges, how much things cost, et cetera, but you've talked to me, I mean, just today about developing kind of helping networks. You talked about village-to-village communities, things that we can do here. What comes up when you look at all these beautiful people right here, and if we were to really come together, what kind of impact do you think we could have?
So first of all, I'm really impressed by the things that you are doing. Even having a wellness center and, looking at people's mental health. I don't know what you're feeding us for lunch today, but looking at things like diet and exercise that you guys could be doing as a community. Those things are really, really important. The pitch that I gave Chip, it started when I was on Capitol Hill. Every lobbyist would come in and ask me for something, and I would ask them for something. And if they didn't do what I wanted, then I wouldn't do what they wanted. And so it was a great way to move forward our agenda. But so I came here and I pitched to Chip. There's a growing movement of what's called villages. So most people want to stay in their houses and in their communities. They don't want to move into another place. But as we age, things like, even just changing the light or, making sure that our smoke detector has the new batteries get a little bit harder. And so these villages have popped up, which is neighbors sort of working together to say, okay, well, what if we as a group hired a handyman that came once a month and could do 10 different homes, right? So people didn't have to individually do that. What if we had a board of people that needed rides to the hospital or to doctor's appointments, and a group of people that were willing to give rides? My parents, as I said, I lived about 100 miles from Spokane, so they would drive that 100 miles with their neighbors to the doctor once or twice a week. What if we thought about the people who are caregivers for people who have memory issues and had a memory cafe on a Wednesday just so people could get out and bring their loved ones and have a moment together. I think there's a lot of things that you as a community can think of how to support the community. And often it takes a coordinator. Many of these villages, there are hundreds of them now all over the country. People pay small amounts of dues to help cover some of the costs and to help with programming. But I think of government solutions and state and federal, but the community solutions are the ones that are most thriving right now, and able to really adapt to whatever that group of people needs. And nothing the government can do can get down to that level. So I think having such a huge and beautiful community of people that are willing to help each other and volunteer can really help people to thrive as they age and live with dignity and purpose and with others in the way that they have the rest of their lives.
Would anybody here be interested in thinking about being a part of a Helping Hands network at Christ Church? I'm not committing you. Would you be interested in thinking about it? How about that for low commitment? Raise your hand.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's beautiful.
Yeah. So what if we got together and tried to figure that out, huh? Maybe we could circulate some kind of email and figure out how to offer much deeper love and care. That's what we are as a spiritual home. And you make it possible with your financial generosity, with your stewardship, and with your stewardship of your time and your talent and your heart and your care. And my hope is through conversations like this that we can take hold of the issues of the day, that we can grow closer, deeper, and more generous and more supportive of people. That people can feel known and seen and loved. There's no greater gift. And I really can't thank you enough for being here today and helping just steer the conversation about what's really going on, about naming the things that we're that bring us concern and worry, but also about challenging us. And I would really encourage you to read the last chapter about a better second 50, because it just is loaded with things that we can do as individuals in a society. And look for an email from me about Helping Hands Community.
Can I give one other plug?
Yeah.
So one of the other things we've been spreading across the country is this idea of age-friendly communities. And so how do you think about, from a local government perspective, how people will need more transportation or housing or healthcare systems? Mecklenburg, am I pronouncing your county right?
Yes.
I practiced last night. Actually is an age-friendly community, and you have a coordinator that's doing lots of good work. So it would be great to connect the church to what some of the resources are here in the Charlotte area as well.
Deb, thank you so much for coming. Glenn, thank you for being here. And we have books for sale and signings and opportunities for conversation in the green room right after this service. Go in peace to love and serve the Lord.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening. We invite you to subscribe, leave us a 5-star review, and connect with Christ Church Charlotte on social media. If you'd like to attend a Faith Forum live, visit christchurchcharlotte.org/Faith Forum to view dates and details of upcoming talks.